Hi, I'm Susan Mannion. I'm a visual artist based in the Northwest, and I'm here at ArtLink at Fort Dunree to present my 11th solo exhibition. The title of the exhibition, Losing Cohesion, actually arose from some of the study tours that I did in Fort Dunree as I wandered around the landscape here. And the landscape is incredible here. Not only do you have the natural geology and the beautiful nature itself, natural resources here as well, but do you have the buildings that have been left behind from a military installation, which are fascinating to me because they're constructed from wood and steel and metals that are slowly and very naturally, they seem anyway, by attrition, just deteriorating and disappearing into the landscape almost. And that drew me to these buildings in particular. So instead of just looking at the landscape, I actually looked at the buildings themselves and thought then, how could I actually interpret what I was seeing and use that as an inspirational point, jump-off point for some of the enamel work and also the Polaroid and photography work that I was undertaking at the time. I remember coming here first, Fort Dunree, as an invitation actually to one of the open calls for an exhibition by ArtLink. And I didn't know anything about the site. I thought I was coming to a gallery, like a normal gallery in a kind of it's a town setting, and landed up here and was amazed with the setting and the fact that a gallery and ArtLink were centred or located in this amazing location, both in the landscape, but also then near the fort itself and the whole history of the area. And that's how I came to be in this area for the very first time, and then became fascinated with it and returned many times. Well, the enamel panels and the vessels themselves I create from sheets of copper. And I like using copper because it's quite a malleable metal to use. I have worked with steel in the past and also with silver. But I thought for this project, the copper would suit the nature and give me the colours and the background stability for the pieces that I wanted to create. And I looked at the structures themselves here in Fort Dunree, and I was fascinated by the rusting on the corrugated iron. And I tried to replicate that with some of the copper by corrugating it and shaping and forming it into the kind of structural forms that you'll see in the exhibition. And then I wanted to try and capture some of the colours of the deteriorating wood work here. And there's a beautiful sort of bluey green that's used in the paintwork here, and there's an underlying brown tone as well. And I tried to replicate that with the enamels. So I was using rust-coloured enamels, but also some of the blues as well to bring out the blue paintwork. And the enamels themselves are applied by hand with a sieve. And the enamel is actually ground up glass. And it's so fine, it's like flour. So you're sifting this flour-like substance onto the copper. And then when I'm happy with the depth of the enamel that I've applied, I will then fire it in a kiln at 900 degrees. And that fuses the enamel to the copper. And there's some reaction sometimes with the copper and the enamels. Sometimes unpredictable. It is a little bit like an alchemy. But I was quite pleased, and upon a lot of experimentation, I was able to get the colours I wanted for this particular exhibition. And I hope that's reflected in the work that I've created. I've created some photographic images as well, and I didn't want to use just a digital process. So I looked back at some of the work I've been doing recently, going back to older forms of printmaking with films and going in that direction with the photographic imagery. And I was particularly drawn to Polaroids. But once again, I didn't want to use just a straight Polaroid. I wasn't happy with just a Polaroid coming out of the camera in that format with the white frame around border. So I wanted to create something slightly different. And I had heard of a process called Polaroid emulsion transfer lift, where you actually take the Polaroid and take the different layers apart and float the actual image through water onto paper. And this fascinated me, and I've been experimenting with that for a number of years. And I thought it would suit the images that I was actually taking here of the rust and the deterioration of wood at Fort Dunree. And through a bit more experimentation, I was able to lift some of the images and put it onto handmade paper. And I loved the idea of the texture of this handmade paper and the Polaroid emulsion lifts sitting on that surface and the kind of interaction between the two. There's also a process that isn't always predictable. Sometimes the images curl or they disintegrate in the transfer process. And I actually like that as well because it kind of physically showed the deterioration of the photograph, which is also mimicking the deterioration of the iron and steel and the rusting of the corrugated iron here. Initially, I thought when I was putting this exhibition together that it would all be housed in one room. But when I arrived at ArtLink, I realised then I had actually more space or availability, more space within the gallery and the corridor and another gallery space below it. And I realised pretty quickly that it would be lovely to take the visitor on a journey. So starting with the photographic work through the Polaroid emulsion lifts, first of all, in the first gallery that you come into, and then transitioning into the enamel work, which is, so you're going from like almost a cold process into a hot process in the second gallery, because the enamels are made in such a fast and quick process within the kiln. And I liked the kind of separation and space between the two styles of work as well, because I think in hindsight, if I put them in the one gallery together, it'd be kind of a little bit of a mix, too much of a mix maybe, and too much of a leap between the two types of work. So I'm very grateful actually to have that extra space to develop the work and to move it into separate areas. I hope after people who visit the exhibition and have seen the work and understand or have some understanding of how it was created and the inspiration that it drew from this actual site, that the visitor will go back out onto the landscape again, maybe with a fresh eye, and look at these buildings again, look at the detail rather than just the big landscape, but look closer and closer at the beautiful formation of the rust and these things that sometimes we take as a bad sign of a building deteriorating, but also they have their own beauty. And the loss of these buildings is such a tragedy to the story of this area. But in itself, I find inspiration in these lovely little details within the buildings. And I hope people take the time to go back out into Fort Dunree, wander around. Yes, look at the beauty of the area. I mean, the amazing light lines on the water here are fantastic. But then also turn and look at the land itself and the buildings that are here and look for the small details, which are important.